Thank you, and let me add my welcome to you. I want to talk today a bit about reforming elementary and secondary education in urban areas with a particular theme, which is, what if there's no magic bullet for this? What do we do? It seems that every few years, especially when we change presidents, mayors, and governors, a big new policy is implemented meant to propel the performance of American school children ever higher and to increase the equality of our education system. And these policies are often aimed at the kids who are the neediest, poor kids, children with disabilities, English language learners. So, for example, going way back to the 60s, and the Great Society, and then the War on Poverty, in 1965, the US Congress passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This was the first time that federal government had entered into an area that is the provenance of state and local districts in a major way. And much of what that bill did is distribute funds to poor students and poor districts. And so that was a good thing, and it still does that. But federal revenues account for 8% of the total K-12 revenues. So this is no magic bullet. 10 years later, I just want to go back and say that is Lyndon Johnson, of course, and that is his first grade teacher that he signed the bill with. 10 years later, the Congress again entered and passed something called, what's now called the Individuals with Disabilities Act. And this was both a civil rights and an education policy. And what it did primarily is it guaranteed a free, appropriate public education for students with disabilities. And this was game-changing for them because before this time, about 6-7% of public school students were students with disabilities, and presently 13% are. So we've seen fairness that way. But there have been questions about the effectiveness of these services and whether they are administered in a race-blind way. So making progress, but again, no magic bullet. 70s, 80s, and 90s, reformers entered the state courts and tried to get the school financing changed. So each state is responsible for its own set of school districts, and states finance about 50% of the revenues. Most of them try to direct funding to districts that are poor and to children who need it, but not all in the same way and not all adequately. So lawyers went in, very, very successful. They often won these cases. And we also saw changes in the revenues. They went to the poorer districts. And just recently, researchers have been able to track the students who were the beneficiaries of these reforms into college and into the workforce, and we find that there are advancements there. So really all good, but as we know, we still have problems in K-12 education. So more ideas in the 90s, accountability. Some of the states, such as Florida and Texas, were the first to enter here to require testing in lots of grades and to hold the schools accountable for progress of the students, which led to the famous, or perhaps now infamous, No Child Left Behind Act. And I think many of you probably grew up under this act, where we nationally have testing in grades 3 through 8 and 1 grade in high school. And I think this tells the story where that guy is saying, wait, I see some improvement. And that's what most people have found, some improvement. But the line does not go from the lower left to the upper right, not massive improvement, just some improvement. And from there, we went to teacher accountability. Not only schools, but let's hold the teachers accountable. Let's not give them tenure so soon. Let's look at their performance. This t-shirt says, I'm a value-added model teacher. And there's sort of a hairy equation in there. Well, I want to say, if you come to Wagner, not only will you learn to read that equation, but if you want, you can learn how to estimate it by taking some of our statistics courses. And currently, we have a lot of efforts in school choices. We've always had magnet schools, but we have charter schools, we have vouchers, and all kinds of things like this. So I have been researching these policies, not since 1964, but for a long time. And what I've discovered is what I've been saying here, that there's no magic bullet, but that some of these make incremental progress. And the question is, can that be satisfying? Can we use evidence-based marginal changes to really build up a basis of knowledge? And I think we can, and I think Wagner students are really good at this. That's what the dean said. Working in contest, looking at evidence, discarding what doesn't work, keeping what does work, and continuing to build on that. So I'm going to talk about one particular piece of research that I've done on small high school reform. And this is not a new idea particularly, but in the early 2000s, under Mayor Bloomberg and his Chancellor Joel Klein, it was adopted in New York City and a number of other cities like Chicago and Boston with Gates Foundation funding. And it massively changed how New York was working with its schools. So I work in this New York City laboratory, also that the dean talked about, of New York City public schools. And before I talk about the small schools, just want to provide some context for you about what New York City looks like versus the nation. So we have the New York City public schools, over 1 million students, over 1,700 schools, versus the US with over 50 million students in 83,500 schools. The red bars are all New York City, and what you see for each group of students who are more difficult to get to a certain level and harder to educate and needier, the red bars are bigger than the green bars. So New York City has more homeless, 9% versus 2.4, more English language learners, 15% versus 9.4, more special ed by far, 20.3% versus 13, and more poor students, 76 versus about 52. Racially and ethnically, the city is very different from the nation as well, much more diverse. Whereas the nation has 26% Hispanic students, New York City has 41%, nation 49% white, New York City 16, nation 16% black, New York City 24%. So New York, very different, very diverse, and unfortunately, performance below the nation. So again, red bars, New York. We see on this NAEP, National Assessment of Education Progress, which is often called the nation's report card, that New York City, in both math and reading, has about 26% of its students at or above proficiency. I wouldn't say the nation is doing wonderfully at 40% and 36%, but it is higher than New York City. And in terms of four-year high school graduation rates, the nation keeps improving. We're at about 83%, at least in 15-16, and about 70.5% for New York. So in terms of small school reform, this was something that started in the 60s, but as I said, big time under Bloomberg in the 2000s. And the idea was to reduce vastly the size of high schools to the size of about 550 or smaller, so that kids who were needier would have a more intimate, caring atmosphere where the teachers would know them and they would know each other. This is before small schools. Maybe you went to a school like this. This is like a 3,000 to 5,000 student school. And after small schools, they were either put into these big buildings that were then broken up, like this one has 4 independent small schools in it, or this one, or they were given their own buildings. So to show you the numbers, the cohort who were 9th graders right at the beginning of the Bloomberg administration had 58 small schools and 109 large schools to look at, choose from. But the kids who 6 years later were in 9th grade, 156 small schools. So from 58 to 156 and a few more large. So a lot more small schools. And how did students do who attended the small schools versus the large? What my research has shown is that they did really well. So in terms of graduation rates, they were 17.5 percentage points more likely to graduate if they attended a small school than a large school. They were less likely to earn a GED, which is an alternative high school diploma, which is not worth nearly what the regular one is. They took more what are called English Regents. These are New York State's high school graduation tests that you have to take to graduate. The only negative is they didn't pass them as much at a 65% or higher level. They also took more math. They didn't pass those, but that was statistically insignificant. So they did better on almost every dimension. And the de Blasio administration, the current administration, has done a lot of changes, distinguished themselves from the past, but they have not closed these small schools. They haven't made more of them, but they haven't closed them. So that's an example of, evidence-based policy. So I got here too fast, but what I wanted to say here was that we've made a lot of progress, a lot of different things, but there's one place we've been going backwards, and that's on school segregation. In 1954, we had the court order. The South changed, the North changed, but in the last 20 years, our schools have been getting more and more segregated. And that is a big place where we all have to work, and this was the 1954 mother and child, I imagine, sitting on the steps of the Supreme Court. High court banned segregation in public schools. So I do hope we can get back to that eventually, but in the meantime, keep building on evidence-based research. Thanks.